Hello literature connoisseurs. Let's begin chapter 17 of Left Behind. The chapter begins as a continuation of the ending of the last chapter. Chloe inadvertently admits that she heard what her father was crying. She makes a comment that she is getting there. Said by no atheist, skeptic, or rational person. No compelling evidence has been presented except testimony about how false the Bible is. With no compelling arguments, straw man arguments, and appeals to emotion. There is no real reason that those and arguments from ignorance should be seen as valid reasons for believing in a God. If God exists, then why are the only reasons for his existence come from fallacies? Chloe has been painted by the Christian stereotype as being an angry atheist. The only thing that has changed recently is their home getting broken into. The authors are now trying to shift into the no atheists in foxholes. This is another foolish notion. Christians have the idea that during a crisis, an atheist will call out to God to save them out of fear. This ignores that numerous atheists have died and have not had deathbed conversions, despite Christians lying about that, and have not cried out to the God they are not convinced exist because they feared death. Christopher Hitchens comes to mind, as well as Daniel Dennett and James Randi, to name a few. Not to ignore is that there is a special platoon in the military that have named themselves atheists in foxholes. Chloe goes back to bed and Rayford feels alone again, so he decides to watch television. CNN is broadcasting news that there are two strange men preaching about Jesus at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. The IDF has yet to move in to subdue the men because their preaching is causing a stir among the Orthodox religious people. The excuse given is that the Wailing Wall is a holy place and the military does not want to intrude. On the surface, this can be described as Jerusalem syndrome, which is a rare psychiatric disorder that can affect religiously inspired visitors to Jerusalem. It can involve religious delusions and acute psychotic states, and can be disturbing and dangerous. The main symptom is when a visitor identifies with a biblical character and acts in ways that seem typical of that character. Revelations chapter 11 says that two witnesses would preach in Israel and do numerous miracles to convince Israel that they are sent from God. The miracles they produce come in the forms of plagues from the Bible. Christians think that these two are Moses and Elijah from the Bible and they have returned to witness. Christians believe that these two are Moses and Elijah because of a few things. First, the one thought to be Moses is thought to be so because the so-called miracles listed are the plagues that Moses did to Pharaoh. The second, thought to be Elijah, is thought to be him because the passages say that no rain will fall in Israel for the 3.5 years they preach. Elijah was listed to have done this in the Bible. Lastly, the Gospels list an event where Jesus takes a couple of his disciples to the top of a mountain. While there he becomes transfigured and two spirits or angels appear that get named as being Moses and Elijah. Not to ruin it for anyone, but these two witnesses are gonna be as lame as Nicolae the Antichrist encyclopedia. Rayford remembers Bruce saying something about 144,000 Jewish converts and wonders if these are the first two of that number. The news changes to more foolishness about Nicolae and how he wowed everyone with another speech. Thank Bob we don't have to read that nonsense, as he stunned the world with another speech about something stupid. Maybe he decided to explain how people wear pants. The news then states that Nicolae was judged by People magazine to be the next sexiest man of the year only a couple of months after they released their last one. Again, the authors seem to be gay for Robert Redford as they keep thirsting for how sexy he is. Insert eye roll. President Fritz gives an uninspiring speech about Nicolae and how he is a friend of peace, though how did they arrive at that conclusion? His history of how printing presses work had nothing about peace in it when he addressed the United Nations. The news then covers that Buck was cleared of all charges regarding the death of his friend Alan. They mention that Buck's passport and ID were found with the body, but Buck was later seen in New York. Not sure how he managed to enter the United States without those, but again, rules don't apply to Christians when they think they are sovereign citizens. Rayford then calls his job and tries to get Hattie moved on his flight, but learns that she has made other arrangements. Imagine the nerve of her changing her plans after the way he treated her like shit. She has some nerve. Insert eye roll. Scene changes to Buck as he returns to his apartment relieved that his worries are over. There is a flashback to the Carpathia interview where Nicolae called Jonathan S. and placed the call on speaker. Nicolae convinced Jonathan to get Todd C. to call off the investigation of Buck. He grudgingly agrees. There is some nonsense about Todd asking if the package is secure and Jonathan reassures him. Buck is skeptical for the first time and he looks questioningly at Nicolae. Nicolae says he has no idea about any of this, but Buck doubts this. Nicolae promises that he will deal with Jonathan and Todd. Buck wants Nicolae to cut ties with them, but Nicolae disagrees, saying that he is in no position to deal with them until they elevate him. Nicolae says he has no idea how much influence they have, but for a walking encyclopedia that seems very lame and untrue. Nicolae confides that he is using them as they use him and he thinks this is to his advantage. He keeps mentioning that in time he will deal with them. Buck asks if he needs anything. Nicolae says he wants a press secretary and Buck refuses. He jokes and says Eric, the reporter from the hall, should do it. Nicolae asks him for an official recommendation and Buck laughs, saying that he was joking. Nicolae goes on to say that he has been negotiating with Israel. They are still weakened by the Russian attack and have agreed to give their miracle formula to the United Nations if the United Nations guarantees them peace. Nicolae says the peace treaty will last a minimum of 7 years. This is another supposed prophecy that says the Antichrist will make a peace treaty with Israel for 7 days. During the midweek the Antichrist will break the treaty. Christians have tried changing this prophecy to go from 7 days to 7 years. Only because peace for 7 days is as ridiculous as the Bible is. Scene changes to Bruce as he calls an emergency meeting of the newly appointed church elders. It's not really an emergency, but he wants to go over what he thinks he has learned about the book of Revelations and end-time prophecy. He starts by telling them that they are living in a period where the Bible says it will last 7 years, then Jesus will return and begin a 1,000-year period where he reigns as world dictator. They break the 7 years into 2 halves. The first half gets divided in half into 2 21-month periods. Bruce claims that during the first 21 months the 7 seal judgments will be enacted, then the second 21 period will be the 7 trumpet judgments. The second half of the tribulation will be the 7 bowl judgments. Not sure how they can know the judgments will take place during those time periods. There is nothing in the Bible to confirm that. No evidence that the judgments can't overlap. Bruce mentions the Antichrist coming and someone asks if it is Nicolae. Bruce and a few others think that Nicolae is too humble to fit their preconceived notion. They feel he needs to be watched, but they express how remarkable a fellow he is. Again, not sure what is so impressive about a walking encyclopedia. I think the authors are just so thirsty for Robert Redford they can't stand themselves. Bruce explains the first 4 seal judgments, which are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Bruce said the first horseman is the Antichrist and he conquers by using diplomacy. Christians believe this because he gets described as having a quiver but no arrows in the quiver. Assuming he hasn't used them all in his conquests. Bruce tells of the second horseman that rides a red horse and names him War. Bruce says he will appear in 6 months' time. Not really sure how he can know that one for sure. The war he supposedly brings is supposed to be World War III. Bruce's black horse represents to him inflation, because of the fallout of the nuclear weapons used. Bruce predicts this to happen within 3 to 6 months. Bruce then says this famine and inflation will only last a couple of months, then the last horseman, named Death, will appear. Supposedly 1/4 of the world's population will die. Someone asks about the 5th seal and Bruce says something about 144,000 Jewish converts, then changes to say that Christians will be martyred by the Antichrist's one world religion. He describes a great woman with the Antichrist as the authors severely cherry-pick the Bible. Rayford takes notes and can't understand why he never believed this stuff before. Probably because he did not allow himself to be gullible before, but I doubt that. He was never skeptical or rational no matter what he thinks about himself. He is easily impressed that the Bible says war is coming and after the war people will suffer. When has this never happened in history? He acts like this has never happened before or has never been predicted before. Bruce describes, in his opinion, that the last 2 seals with the 6th is a worldwide earthquake and the last is a pause to bring on the trumpet judgments. He jumps to the 2 witnesses and describes their supposed role in chapter 11 of Revelations. Scene changes to Buck as he returns Hattie's call and she tries to get him to introduce her to Nicolae. Buck kinda agrees but tells her that he's not making any promises. Scene changes to Chloe as she has more bullshit between her and Rayford. Rayford gets her to agree to go with him on his flight to New York and she finally agrees, making some of her usual snarky comments that are ultimately uninteresting. Rayford tells her that he wants her there when she talks to Hattie. Remembering that he's already confessed that he cares nothing about Hattie except he wants to use her as a front to try and convert his daughter so that his daughter is supposed to have no idea he's doing it. Chloe asks if Rayford is sick of her yet and Rayford makes an imbecile reply. Because no one is buying his insincerity. His long list of failures proves that he cares about no one but himself and the only reason he has the slightest bit of interest in his daughter is that he wants to manipulate her for self-validation. Once she converts there will no longer be any need for her. Scene changes to Buck as he has a meeting with the owner of his magazine. He arrives and the secretary is crying for some unknown reason. Buck learns that Steve is in the office of the owner. Buck wonders if it has anything to do with the shenanigans they pulled. If you consider breaking international laws as being shenanigans. Christians that speak out against the Harry Potter series often complain that the characters break rules and never face any consequences for their actions. Here we have Christians doing the same thing where laws don't seem to apply to them. Christians are nothing if not hypocrites. So Buck speaks to Steve and the owner and it gets revealed that Steve resigned so that he can become Nicolae's press secretary. Buck is offered to take over Steve's old job. Buck hesitates and asks for some time to think it over. The boss makes a weird joke and the chapter ends. Eric, the rival of Buck, was found dead of a suicide. Why Buck was recommended over anyone else makes no sense, nor why the charges of falsifying information to the police was also ignored. Again, more proof that Christians think they are above the law and hypocrites for using it as a reason to hate Harry Potter when that author did the same as these authors. See you next time for Chapter 18 of Left Behind.